We're going to have a immersive roundtable conversation about immersive experiences. So I figured what I would do is I would actually just present a little bit just to sort of set the tone and sort of give everyone like sort of a context of, what I'm talking about when I talk about immersive experiences. But, obviously we're looking to sort of broaden the definition and have a real open conversation. So realize that there's like a ton missing from here. And I'm just going to kind of give some of the highlights. So, a quick history and completely incomplete history of immersive experiences. So, when we define immersive experiences, I'm talking about multi-sensory environments that surround or respond to the visitor. A lot of times, these are using projection, sound, sense, haptic, or interactivity. And a lot of times, they're blending art, technology, and narrative. Um, so, let's get into it. So this is like not immersive experiences are like nothing new. I mean, you could find things that go way back like before the 1700s. But I think like the cyclorama is like kind of a good place to start when you start seeing these like multi-user participatory immersive experiences. And actually what's amazing is like if you look on the National Park Service's website, like some of these are still around. But like this is like the great great grandfather of a lot of the immersive experiences you see today. We are also standing on the shoulders of IMAX and these sort of like large projection domes. The first of which was started like 1923. So it goes way back. And then, obviously a lot of us probably experienced our first immersive experiences in like the 80s and 90s in IMAX theaters. A lot of these were in like science centers. And then, I think there's also a lot of that's informed by a lot of the things that were happening in like the art world, particularly like at least my references are a lot of like the art world in New York in the 1950s and 60s. Alan Capro doing these happenings, which like honestly, if you look at it, like some are pretty cool ideas. And Yayoi Kusama, before she became like a giant international brand for like LVMH and all that. And she was doing infinity rooms all the way back in the 1960s. And like, I mean, honestly, these things still hold up incredibly well today. And then you have some of what we would consider probably sort of like modern experience design. teamLab. This was actually one of their first experiences, was in like 2001, when they were a much smaller collective. If you guys aren't familiar with teamLab, look them up. Tokyo-based uh, experiential art collective. But then they created this thing called Borderless in 2018, which kind of like blew it up. Because it had both sort of this immersive projection, but it also had lots of interactivity. teamLab has done absolutely brilliant work. We actually had them on Futurespaces much earlier. So go check that out. But they're pretty fantastic. And they also just opened up an enormous new complex in Tokyo that I'm really looking forward to checking out. And then you had things like Museum of Ice Cream. Or like Snarkitecture's installation at the beach, called The Beach, which they did at the National Building Museum. They did in a bunch of other places. These things were kind of like selfie moments. They also had a lot to do with ball pits for some reason. People freaking love ball pits. Um, ball pits is going to be its own vertical of experience design. But these things were, playful, participatory, in some ways geared way towards like emotion than content. It had a very different vibe than a lot of the stuff that had come before it. And then, I wanted to track a little bit of can't talk about immersive without talking about Van Gogh. So the first Van Gogh was actually projection experience was Van Gogh Live, which was 2011. I wanted to put out a shout out. This is a Blue Cadet shout out that we did a Van Gogh projection room in 2016 for the Artists of Chicago, which was still their most attended exhibition. Probably had more to do with Van Gogh than what we did. I think we did this like with like one Pico projector. It was like not a huge installation, maybe two projectors. But it was I just wanted to like say that we were early on in this because like obviously there was this huge projection boom. I would say it even probably started a little bit before 2020, but I think this definitely was accelerated in COVID because these became like some of the only experiences where you could have social distancing, but also these cultural projection experiences. So you saw Monet and Frida Kahlo and Klimt, and then there were like literally like I think at one point like 20 simultaneous touring Van Gogh exhibits by like different companies because this stuff I was like I think in the like open creative common use or whatever, so they could just steal it and monetize it. Um, and then, obviously, there's some of the big hits. Eric just walked off the camera when I was giving a shout out to Meow Wolf. Meow Wolf's House of Eternal Return, which opened in 2016. Sleep No More, which is amazingly from 2011. And then you have things like Museum of the Future, which opened in 2022, and SUPERBLUE 2021. I would say like one of the things that I kind of would think about when looking at these is like these are very, very, very high cost per square foot, like very built-in environments that were meant to monetize over a long period of time. But really pushing the craft of immersive. And then you have things, these are both Moment Factory projects. Get these guys on Futurespaces at some point. But things where there was like projection on architecture. I could certainly give a shout out to, oh gosh, what was the name of the team that got swallowed by MSG Sphere? Um, Oh gosh, Obscura Digital. They were very early on this as well. And then Astra Lumina, which is a thing that Moon Factor's been doing recently, which is all these like night walks, which is like immersive experience but outside. I think actually one of the things I love about Moment Factory is how much of the stuff they do outside, and using those as shared spaces. And then there's this whole sort of phenomenon of branded experiences, and so this is like everything from these like Stranger Things and Bridgerton pop-up experiences. Like this one is actually kind of almost more immersive. The Bridgerton experience is like I think it's like a ball, so it's like almost like immersive theater meets immersive experience. The lower right-hand corner is like the great South by Southwest World, which was the Westworld installation at South by Southwest, where they recreated a version of Westworld at South by, which is super cool. Arik, I gave you another shout out. You're off camera, camp, for doing. They've done things like the Bluey experience, and then things like things like Doodles, also at South by Southwest. Like looking at like a lot of these are very, very temporary. Maybe, in a camp installation is a couple months. A lot of these are like a couple days. Very different business models. But I think also an interesting, beat within the immersive experience space. And then, there's things that happen in science centers. So like actually if you Google future, if you go to Spotify and you look at future spaces, I actually have like two podcast episodes, which were like very, very highly produced that I did before COVID, under the Future Spaces brand. And one of them was basically me and Abby Bish, for the Franklin Institute bitching about, why science centers have like fake dinosaurs, in them. So like I'm gonna show my hand and say that like I kind of like love hate these things. Jurassic World, which is like a massive traveling exhibit at science centers. They bring in a lot of money. They help the gate. They help for membership in museums. But they also literally have like fake dinosaurs on display in a science center. And then Art of the Brick is a traveling Lego experience. A lot of times these things are spun as like being about creativity, and inspiring, emotion and creation. I don't know. I've mixed feelings about them only because of where they're placed. But my kids love them, so what are you gonna do? And then like also just talking about some of like the standards of immersive experience design, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, one of the first Ralph Applebaum projects. Big shout out to those guys. Places like the National World War II Museum, which was an early Gallagher, now G&A project. Some of the stuff that, Think and local projects did with the 9/11 Museum. There's definitely pushing towards immersive in those spaces. Give myself a little bit of a shout out for Blue Cadet's work at the MIT Museum, which is teaching science, in a science center context. And then I also just like wanted to look at, like what is the evolution of things like the IMAX or, MSG Sphere, is obviously a huge one. And then you have things like COSM, which are sort of these like smaller MSG spheres, sort of like if you take a MSG sphere and cross it with a sports bar. It's like the little mini like labradoodle. whatever. But they sell a lot of F&B. But you're going to see a lot of these things popping up, and these things are quite interesting, and an interesting note in immersive experience. And then I just threw in a couple other catch-alls. There's this small brand called Disney that has some theme parks. Universal apparently also has some theme parks. So themed entertainment is also a massive, massive space for immersive. In the upper left-hand corner, I put Noma, which is like the top restaurant in the world in Copenhagen, which I think closed. But you know, I think there's a school of thought that says this is a very, very much an immersive experience and a multi-sensory experience. Um, the lower left-hand corner is the Eras Tour by Taylor Swift, a Pennsylvania born country singer that became a pop star, if you haven't heard of her. And then in the lower right-hand corner is Sandbox VR, which is multi-user collaborative VR experiences, which honestly are popping up all over the place. I think they just opened one in Philadelphia. But again, another kind of um, way that immersive experience manifests. So we're going to get into a whole conversation here, but and part of it is like I really want to look at like what they call in AI the latent space. Like what we've shown a whole bunch of things that are out there. Like what's missing? Like which of these nodes are growing? Which of these are shrinking? Which of these are combining? And then like also just here's just like putting these things in a little bit of our framing. Some of them are temporary, which means like low cost per square foot. We're talking like $300 a square foot. Some of them are permanent, like this is Meow Wolf. I think you're probably looking at over $1,000 a square foot. So these are different economics. Some of them are platforms, which means the content is changing all the time. So, Cosm, the Sphere, they're really almost operating more like theaters. They host content, but they are not they don't really have. I mean, besides that Darren Aronofsky film, they're meant to change. And then you have things like that are very place based, and then they just don't change. Like the work that teamLab is doing, very very built in. A lot of the museum work. Is very, very built in. So I think that's also something that's kind of worth thinking about when you're looking at how these things are being conceived and built. Some of them are built around like education or like knowledge. They function almost like documentary films. Some are like, are more entertainment based. So like maybe they're more like comedies or they're like, just they have a different set of functions. So I think it's also interesting to see how some of these map and then where some of these combine. And I think there's always been like this is like sort of the high level critique of these things. But I think there's been valid critique around immersive that they can be shallow, repetitive, and Instagram bait. Maybe TikTok bait now. And I think there's been an assessment that maybe in the future we need more interactivity, better storytelling, more emotionalization, more emotion, personalizations. And then I think one of the things that we're trying to figure out too is like, we're seeing a lot of new technologies coming down the pipe with the convergence of AI, AR, VR, just like even the improvement of some of these projectors and the prices coming down. So I think it'd be interesting to think about like, as we're looking at some of these tech trends, how do we think that might influence what's out there? So I put out a couple just like conversation starters to get us started. So I'll stop sharing and like let's maybe start thinking about like what are the qualities that define a great immersive experience. So I would say for this, just feel free to go camera on, raise your hand, and we'll just start talking. Or I'll start calling on you. Brad, McDonald. What do
Oh,
you think?
geez. You caught me with checking email.
Oh no.
No, you're good. You're good. The thing that I've been thinking about, and I don't think this is inclusive or a requirement for all immersive experiences, but the thing I've been thinking about is collaboration.
hmm
And one of the principles that really, really intrigues me is this idea that the space comes to life through the presence of people. That it's not you hit a button, you hit play, and it goes. Like somehow
Yeah.
the interaction is core to the experience. And maybe that's not exclusive to all immersive experiences, but maybe that's a path to depth within them.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, I think that's also one of the things that's interesting when you think about the affordance of a physical space. Like
Yeah.
you are there with other people. So it's like kind of a shame that if you have an interaction that it's like a one-to-one interaction and it doesn't encourage you to sort of engage in a group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. Eric, you had a thought, and Ed also has a raised hand. Okay, Eric.
Hello, everybody. Um, I think the points that you just made, Brad, also suggest that some challenges and some important opportunities at the other side of that. So you are in a space. You're in a space with a lot of people. One of the shortcomings I've seen on a lot of the immersive exhibits that are called immersive is that they have no agency for the visitor. So no individual visitor can see that they are making a difference in the space.
Yeah.
That is a huge design challenge. And just to toot our own horn, I'd like to point you to Design IO's Connected Worlds at the New York Hall of Science, where we busted our hump to make a 5,000 square foot space responsive to each individual. And on the other hand, there are immersive experiences that aren't interactive. And I think that distinction is important the Sistine Chapel does not depend on your ability to get God actually to touch Adam's finger. It's a space that you interact with, that you're engaged in. You're with lots of other people, and it's profoundly memorable. In part because it's so incredibly immersive. So I think you can make this distinction between immersive spaces and immersive and interactive spaces,
Uh,
as you're thinking about design. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Theo Watson, who we actually had on
Yeah.
Futurespaces this week. He
Yeah.
did a great job. I had a stomach bug, so I wasn't able to MC that one.
Yeah.
But they do absolutely beautiful work. Joyce, you're actually keeping better track of this. Can you let me know who's next? Was it Ed?
Ed.
Ed Radley, you're up.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, one of the things in my research on visitor experience in museums, particularly around immersion, um, if you go back to like the 1990s and Janet Murray's work in Hamlet and the Holodeck, which if you haven't read it, was a brilliant book in 1997 and has been reissued in like 2017, an actual reissue, not just repackaging of old content, and it is every bit as germane as it was back then. She makes the interesting distinction that what we talk about as immersion is really a transitive act of going from one environment to a different environment. And the act of immersion she likens to like jumping into a swimming pool, right? So if you think of the moment after you jump into the pool, what happens is the environment is so different that it forces you to pay attention.
Mm.
You don't know how to stay up, you can't breathe, your skin is telling you the temperature has changed, and for a short period of time, you're super aware of what's going on because your brain is processing everything much more thoroughly than it usually does, right? Most of the time we walk through the world, we're not paying attention to what's going on. Like when you watch people, encounter a Norman door and they think the door pushes, but the door pulls, like they don't really start paying attention until after they've smacked their face on the glass. Immersion is another way of making people actually pay attention to what's going on because you have to try to figure out what are the rules of the space. So, um, for Eric's example, like the Sistine Chapel, most of us don't live in places like the Sistine Chapel. So just trying to understand like what is the space I'm in and what can I do um, is a tremendous gift to us in terms of getting people to just pay attention to what's going on. And what happens, to get to the earlier question about interactivity, is like when you're trying to figure out the rules of the environment, if there's nothing there to keep you engaged, then you stop being immersed. And if you've ever watched people in immersive Van Gogh or any of its ilk, like they walk in, they look around, they immediately start touching things to see like, does this space allow me any agency? And when the answer is no, they look around for like 20 minutes and they leave. In places like Connected Worlds, to toot Eric's horn, when you find like, oh, if I move this log, suddenly this virtual stream of water has changed its path, and now all the plants are withering over here and they're growing over here. It rewards that. It rewards that intention with more detail and more things to do, which keeps you engaged longer. So for me, one of the most interesting things about all of this research was really realizing that by itself, immersion provides really only a temporary boost to visitors' attentiveness. If you don't do something else, then it very quickly fades in the same way that after you jump into the water, after a couple of minutes, you figure out how to tread water or you drown. But assuming you figure out how to tread water, it stops being a new environment and is just the environment. And if you
Yeah,
start
no,
playing a game or something or swimming laps, it stops being interesting and you stop focusing on it.
no, I love it. I love it. I think this is going to be a thread that we sort of pick up on, which is like there's that the tension between also the passivity and agency, because it's like you can go to a film and like watch a movie or go to a Taylor Swift concert or even the Sistine Chapel and receive whatever liturgy, and you're just receiving. You're not necessarily given much agency outside of like, sort of like what's defined by the ritual, which is very different than things that are like more like games and things where the users be given a lot of agency. So I think that's an interesting thread we can kind of pull on. Joyce, who's next to talk? Or to
Think Becky.
Becky.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as I've been thinking about, immersive and where we're going, I have worked a lot on the business side. I worked on Sleep No More. I worked on Life and Trust. And one of the big things that I can tell in this marketplace today is that people we're not going to see similar things to Sleep No More and Life and Trust anymore. We can't afford them. They've already been done. And so the awe of that experience is kind of worn off. And really, what I see when I see a lot of these Instagram pop-ups is people that haven't been studying audiences and their desire. So when you go into a space, what you should be thinking about is who are you talking to and what do they like to do? Borderless is amazing because it's not just the awe, it's the interactive experience and it's the autonomy that you give to children. And it's also thinking about how to take the work that they're doing and monetize it on multiple levels. So when I'm working with businesses, when I'm talking about where we go next, it's really important to think about not just what we're doing in maybe the space that we own. There is a group in New York, they're called Inter, and they had so many opportunities just by the mere space that they were in to monetize on multiple levels, to take advantage of the space that they were given. They're right in the center of New York. They're accessible to Parsons. In fact, a lot of the people that created the immersive there were from Parsons. They're also right next to NYU's ITP. I'm like, a better use of this space than just being one exhibition. It's being an incubator for immersive. You have the technology, you have everything that's going on, you have the talent that's all around you. And I hate to say it, they're a little low margin because there's so many of them and they're young. So giving them the opportunity and expanding that and being a lot like, our team in Tokyo, in Japan, who are using talent, but under teamLabs versus any individual creator, they're giving autonomy to the artist and then expanding it out from there. You could do the same thing by giving an incubator in New York to these sorts of talents and then moving it out from there. Looking at trends in the marketplace, Joe Pine is writing a new book on immersive and health and wellness. That's two trends coming together that are incredibly poignant at this point. And that expands from just entertainment to other areas like luxury, like travel, places that we can really monetize across the board. When you look at Coben's new thing in Texas, that's going to be an immersive spa. That is what we need to think of when we're thinking of what is next, when we're thinking of immersive. We need to think of all of the places where we can travel to, all of the groups that can take advantage of this, and how to expand our perspective instead of trying to do the big sort of overwrought 6-story in a bank vault type of thing.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. You picked up there's a couple of different threads there that I would love to sort of like pin. One I'm going to say Arctic House actually, which is like sort of like one of the OG projection houses. I'm actually part of a group over there that's figuring out what that do with them. A big part of it is actually trying to get them to operate more like a platform. Like look more like the Sphere model or the Cosm model. Say like, okay, how do you actually like leverage all the creators and make it a place where like the content is constantly changing? And I think that also kind of like goes back to this idea of repeat visitation. Because a lot of these are one and done. Like you're not going to go to the Museum of Ice Cream every week. Um, maybe, like, and so the question is like, how do you build in the resilience of these places to change over content and to attract people over and over again? Whereas like maybe, you do get a massage or a wellness experience every month. So, I think it's interesting to think about how those sort of life rituals dovetail in. All right, enough of my monologue. Joyce, who's next up?
Journey.
Hi, y'all. Yeah, I work at a much smaller scale for the most part. We don't have access to a ton of money, children's museums, things like that. They're just scraping by. But I think, experiences that really make an impact, that create memories that, that people remember when they're 40 years later or even later than that, it can be very simple, honestly, and it can be a passive experience, but it's got to be magical and it has to
Yeah.
feel like it's big scale, even if it isn't literally a large scale. Like there was this wonderful Terrell exhibit they had in LACMA years ago now, where they basically put you in this little MRI looking container, this little egg, and you go inside. It's one person at a time. There's an incredibly long line of people, which I think was a downside, but you go inside and it is utterly immersive. Like you are 100% present. It is extremely memorable, and it's intense as well. So like I will never forget that experience. And to me, that's kind of where great experience design truly shines. Is when it's creating memories, whether again big, small, interactive, or passive.
Yeah, no, I also would love to give a quick shout out to children's museums, or just like children's play centers, like because that is also one that like you want to use them all the time, So it's like it's like they need to be immersive, but it's also like if you have young children, like you need a place to put them, particularly in cold cities during the winter. So like there's I really appreciate when those things are designed well. Okay, so Joyce, who's that? I'm gonna you know what? Let me plug one real quickly. I would love to talk a little bit about accessibility. If there's anybody who'd want to talk about that too, because I think that's something I'm also very interested in is like audiences, but also accessibility. Like like how are these spaces available to other different groups, abilities, backgrounds. Just putting it out there. If someone wants to raise that question or make a point, I would love to hear a little bit about that as well. Joyce, who's next though?
Alan is queued up next.
Alan, good to see
Hey,
you.
good to see you all. And Josh, this is an amazing conversation. Thank you very much. Immersive spaces is really close to my heart, and love all the discussion that is happening here. So just to go to one, I think an immersive space needs, in my opinion, be something that where you step out of your daily reality. It's kind of escapism to go somewhere else. And obviously it can be anything from going to a concert or what we do, right? Going exhibitions to museums and experiences. I just want to mention here one immersive experience that we just opened here in New York City. So it's called Path of Liberty at Freedom Plaza. It's a 6 acres outdoor installation that is basically treated as an art, large scale photography and video. I invite everyone to go to see it. But what is pretty amazing, when Josh, you were asking the question about accessibility here, the initial goal of the exhibition was a preamble to the 250-year anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The way it was done, we worked with Daniela Val, a filmmaker. She basically toured the United States and go to as a contemporary installation to ask the question, what does freedom, liberty, what does it mean to be American today? So you can imagine actually the kind of responses, very diverse. I mean, it was from all genders, all communities. It was really an invitation for normal people to speak about this amazing topic. And it is a very important thing to say. It is a night installation. So you go, it's 6 acres. You go on a path, you travel. It's all about creating surprises, creating a multi-sensorial experience where you have the noise of the city contrasting with basically what was an industrial with wild plants just growing. So the contrast is pretty amazing. It's by the Hudson River. I'm super excited to talk about it. So thank you.
So Alan, I will say, if you want to do a tour gathering or something through Futurespaces, like just hit me up. We'll make it happen. You can take people through there. You get to see how tall Alan is in person. Um, but no, I would love to. And I think that one of the things I actually find when we talk about accessibility, I personally love things that are out in public space. I love the idea of reclaiming public space from advertising, and to create, and also like public space is populated by the public. There's a lot of diversity in those spaces, and a lot of people don't actually engage with each other in public spaces. So I think as designers of public space, there's something very powerful about creating opportunities in those spaces for more uh, collaboration, conversation, like intersection. Anyway, off my monologue. Joyce, who's next?
Ryan.
Hey, oh, it's nice to meet all of you. This is a great talk. I sort of changed what I was going to talk about midstream, so forgive me if I'm being a little bumbling, but what Becky was talking about with thinking about who the audiences are that we're talking to is something that's very interesting to me as a designer, because so often the approach is what are the demographics we're talking to.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at immersive spaces, and when you say immersive spaces, I'm, as an exhibit designer, really thinking about immersive slash interactive spaces, because whatever, immersive space without interaction, it's just sort of like, okay, cool, it's a big projection.
Yeah.
Great. But when I'm thinking about that, I'm looking for people who to read or to talk about like types of interaction and types of people and types of, for lack of a better word, personality, though I don't think that that's necessarily the right approach. And I've been reading about, stuff by like Jason Vanderberg had done The Domains of Play, and Nicole Lazaro had done Keys to Fun. And I think that there's something in there that gets lost, and we don't, or at least in the interactions I have and the collaborations I have, there isn't time to really talk through the different types of interaction and the way people interact. Because,
Yeah.
for example, what you were saying, Josh, putting people into a public space and trying to get them to interact with each other, that's scary for, I think, most people. And how do you crack that and make it, if I don't even know if safe is the right word, because maybe you don't want them to necessarily feel safe, but maybe you want to inspire them to feel brave. What are those things? And so when I see interactive experiences that seem to like start to touch on that in an interesting way, the different types of people are freeing people. One of the things I loved about Sleep No More was this, I thought there was this genius idea of the masks on the audience.
Yeah.
It really changes something for people, right? But obviously that experience, like she said, you can't pull it off without a lot of money. What do you do? What do you do?
No. I think, I mean, well, I will just say that, like, in some ways, like, that's kind of what we're doing with Future Spaces, is what I'm trying to do. It's just like, I see Future Space, the blind man and the elephant, like,
Mhm.
that is this like massive thing. And like, we're all just sort of feeling different parts of it and kind of sharing. So there's a lot of good stuff there. If people want to send me their like resources and books, I will put those together and send those out or put them up on the website. But like I'd also say, like, there's some really exciting stuff out there. I'm gonna be hosting Daily to Le Jour, who does these really amazing interactive playground type things that blend technology and play. I think that's just a beautiful way to get people to interact together in public spaces. I mean, I think the
Mhm.
playground is a great example of that. I think there's just great precedents out there. But honestly, I think just the more conversation we can have, the better to arrive at these things. This is not, yeah, I think you're right. Like, this is like a very, like, unlike like cooking, like we don't have a lot of cookbooks. It's
Mhm.
like we're in a kind of a folk art. So,
Could I
um,
just make a comment quick about the idea of interaction amongst people in a public space and whether that is the trend, because I feel like a bit it's more about personalization, not so much as interaction as much in a public space, especially post COVID. Like, I don't know how many people want to just be introduced to have a random conversation in a public space, more so than have a shared experience, but have a method of personalization within it. I don't know. It's a topic.
I think those are not mutually exclusive. I think
No, yeah.
I mean I sometimes point to like the genius of the Taylor Swift like the ritual of sharing those little bands. You know, because it's like you're not like trying to like create like conversation between two people, but like, you know,
No, there's a connection. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like it can, and like, you know, and like two people on a seesaw or a swing set is like they're not necessarily you're not necessarily getting them onto like a debate about like race in
Yeah.
America. But like I think there's like a obviously a spectrum of interaction that and you know and like and I don't think there's one solution. You know, it's like these are all, you know,
Totally.
bespoke
Yeah,
little
yeah. Yeah,
solutions.
yeah. I think part of
So
it is like non-linear. That's
yeah,
non-linear.
totally.
Sorry
All
to
right,
just jump
Joyce.
in.
No, all good, all good. Emily, you're gonna be speaking later this summer. Good to see you.
Jesse?
Yeah, hi. Again, also from my side, thanks for the rapid fire introduction, because the whole point, I feel like what you just said, Josh, that it's like cannot be dogmatic. I mean, like, and now I've been scribbling down to myself this note. Firstly, jumping into the pool, I think that's the best metaphor I've heard about immersiveness, not being about the technology, about the spectacle, but it's about what the immersion really means. So for me, like maybe kind of, so I've been working in the sort of commercial and the artistic scope and in the academic context, dealing with all those things. So I every time when experience design, interaction design, immersive experiences, UX, all these kinds of things come up, I always have to kind of take a step back. Where does it come from? So what is the sort of a common ground that I have to decipher this term? And that way is like, yeah. So there is really like when I hear now. So the introduction now this lights the full spectrum of immersive spaces. That's like you rarely see that such like so exhaustively. Like everybody in the art school have a different aspirational goal of what the interactivity is supposed to be and what are the freedoms. And when you're working in the commercial domain, then you look at it in a very, very different angle. So I throw two names to the library. I was thinking of Paul Durish from the kind of the who coined the term embodied interaction. And I think that is kind of, we all know interaction design, but the embodied interaction, everybody's talking about embodiment, but maybe not from the same kind of academic point of view, where the social interaction, the tangible interaction in the physical space, and then with the technology on top of it all come together. And even though that is kind of a nitty-gritty small scale, I think that is very much the sort of a foundation that in this bigger, spectacular, immersive spaces that can kind of help frame it. And the other one I was thinking is Regis Debray, who used to be the sort of a hanging out at the time when Marshall McLuhan was in the North America. He was the French guy who was coming up with the médiologie instead of the mass communication studies. And he's talking about transmitting culture through technology. So the kind of rituals that we build about things that we expect to be interactive. I mean, the way we talk about interactivity, I feel too often the constraints that we put into making public interactions tend to, that we have to reduce the complexity, but it has to be interactive. So the sort of a social complexity of meaning making is kind of dumbed down to press a button, choose left or right, wave your hand, so that it's interactive. And therefore the interaction becomes kind of self-fulfilling goal. It's like the emperor's new clothes, that it has to be interactive, therefore it's good and it's progress and it's future, even though now already mentioned many times, Sleep No More, amazing. And masks are not the expensive part. It's of course the space, real estate and all the staging. So we can do these kind of things that are extremely immersive and powerful without the technological complexity. Anyway,
yeah.
that was
Oh
just
no, totally. And you know, I would point everyone to Violo's room, which I think is that at the shed right now? The Punch
It's
Drunk's
coming
new
to the
stuff?
shed in June.
Okay, yeah, I got to see it in London, but I mean, that's a very stripped down experience. You know, it doesn't require that amount of real estate. But I think what's really interesting is I think yes, is it Yossi? Is that how? Or,
Uh, you see, yeah.
UCs. Okay, I'll never get it. Sorry. But I think that I think what's interesting is like when you talk about not being dogmatic, I think there's also something about being intentional. Be like, what is the emotional outcome? What's the educational
Yeah.
outcome? What's the social outcome? And then, just like defining those parameters. So I feel like trying to create an experience is like, it's trying to create like a meal. It's like what's better,
Yeah.
like, Chinese food or pizza? It's like it doesn't matter. It's just the intent.
Yeah.
So it's like we shouldn't be
Yeah.
so productive to try to like boil this down to one
Yeah.
recipe.
And I
Josh,
tell you, like,
oh, sorry.
sorry, just to close this. So, and when teaching, I realized that when you have a mix of uh, computer science students and art students together, you have to also frame their expected results. So you have to understand that they strive for very different things. And if you
Totally.
acknowledge that and bring it on the table, then great things can come out.
100%. Joyce, who's next?
Next in the queue, we have Clay.
Hello. So first of all, I'd like to give a shout out to a really nice thing that I saw this weekend at the Museum of Art and Technology down in Lower Manhattan in New York. It's really not very advertised, considering you have all this other stuff that's sort of bombarding you and advertisement wise. But so I went to see it just kind of on a whim, and it's actually really amazing. Really good use of infinite mirror stuff. Really nicely put together, some really cool interactive stuff. It's also known as Mercer Labs down there. Another thing that I really enjoyed, which is unfortunately I think was killed by COVID, was the Brooklyn BAM used to do this thing called Technopolis, where we kind of bring together a bunch of different kind of interactive experiential stuff, and it ran for a few years, and then COVID killed it and never came back. I'd love to see that come back. And then, of course, there's the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which is kind of like the granddaddy of kind of like hands-on interactive science kind of stuff, which doesn't use a lot, isn't super high tech, but it's amazing. Which kind of segues into my next point, which is that I feel like and this is something that you brought up, Josh, is one of the best uses of interactivity is with children's museums and children's spaces, for a couple of reasons, I think. Because first of all, kids are natural interactors. They love to engage with the world. Where you see adults, they'll be a little reserved and kind of hanging back. The kids will run right up and start jumping around and everything. But also in terms of education and teaching, it adds another modality to the learning process. It makes learning hands-on. So as opposed to just being sort of lectured to and told this is this and that is that and this is how it works, you get to play with it and experience it yourself. I think UC, I can't pronounce his name, made a really good point. Sometimes there's a lot of interactivity just for interactivity's sake, just for the point of being, so you could slap the interactive label on things, which is very trendy nowadays. And, so you see a lot of stuff where they just like set up a connector, real sense, and you just flap your arms, and that's about the extent of it, and it reacts in some way. But I feel like it really works best when it's really well integrated into the concept. And just one final thought, I think that UC also brought this up when he's talking about you have kind of artists or art students and computer science people. And I think that everybody kind of lives a bit on the spectrum there, where, at least in people who work in this space, kind of aren't necessarily one or the other, but somewhere in between, and everybody's kind of like on one end or the other. I tend to lead towards the tech side. But I've always felt, at least in my practice and my work, that art leads, that concept leads, and the technology is there in the service of the creative or artistic vision. And it's really about what the artist or creative director or whoever is kind of the visionary, what the imagination is. And then technology's job is to kind of figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I will note that Tom Rockwell, the Chief Creative Officer of the Exploratorium, is on the call here. And we're going to be hearing from him. Actually, he'll be presenting at Futurespaces later this summer. But huge fan of the Exploratorium, a huge fan of what they're doing. Museum of Art and Technology, I think that's Mercer Labs, correct? Um, Worth checking out. I have my own critique of it. They have a black ball pit, which is a color I've never seen before. But, it's like very, very high production value, high cost per square foot, and but they do some cool stuff. Joyce, who do we have next?
Karen.
Thank you very much, Josh. This is super interesting conversation. Yeah, just picking up from the last speaker, I'm talking from a very personal perspective. So I'm an artist, I'm an XR artist, and the future of immersive for me is transformation and connection. All I'm purely concerned with is the human aspect of it. All the rest, like the scale, the nice lights, the nice pretty pictures, the lovely AI, that's just peripheries, like accessories. So all I'm focused on is having that, creating that transformation within the participant, whether that is emotive, psychological, spiritual. And then as we move forward into this more of a technological age, that transformation combined with connection is all I care about. Everything else, we'll figure that part out later. It's secondary. And all that other tech stuff, it actually picks itself. My title, if people don't know me, is Storyteller from the Future, and I create films that watch you back using artificial intelligence and facial recognition. I've been doing that for a decade because I was like, the future's tech with film to really get people's attention, because that's how people interact with the world. So you have to speak their language to connect with them. But what are you going to do with them once you get them, really get them, That's the role of the artist to really make a better world, as cliche as it is, but I'm really focused on that emotionality, that spiritual, that psychological connection. Yeah, that's
Awesome.
all that matters. Nothing else matters.
And Kara, we were on a thread together to get you to speak at Futurespace. So I'll email you back on that one. But
yeah, definitely 100%.
I was just going to do a quick shout out to Brett Renfer, who's over at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was at a tiny studio before that called Blue Cadet. That's my studio. But he uses this term called affordance, which it's not, he didn't coin it, he just uses it all the time, and got me on it. But like the idea is like every technology and like whether it's like super high tech or super low tech has an affordance, like it has the things that it allows you to do. So going back to almost like that recipe analogy, it's like, okay, like we know what salt does to a dish. We know what garlic does to a dish, So like, I think thinking about technology as almost ingredients, and knowing the affordances and know how they'll change the experience, I think it's a really great way of thinking about it, but ultimately it's serving that sort of like what is that user experience? What's that? Yeah.
And the tech is like, when I made my consensus gentian project, I was like, I need something which is totally, fully the most immersive thing in the whole world, and it's totally accessible. And I was like, oh, it's a mobile phone. Like,
yeah, it's a boring way of thinking about it. It's like trying to be a chicken chef. It's like whatever, dude. It's a good ingredient.
Once you have the vision,
Yeah.
the pretty tools will present themselves for you once you have the vision. But to me personally, as an artist, it emanates from the human spirit and creating an experience as an architect for the human spirit, and then adding the tech on at the end. So that to me is the future of immersive as we move even more into this technological age. I know spirit will be like desperate for that kind of connection and transformation.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. All right, Joyce, who's next?
Monique.
Hey there. I actually just posted my thing in the chat because I thought I might not get picked. But basically, I'm coming as like a creative producer and technologist and have seen a lot of spaces. And I just feel like it's more about grabbing attention so much that things just become really gimmicky and single-minded. And I've found in my own work and have been craving this in installations to kind of go the other direction, where we're not trying to be so single-minded and kind of pile on with, like everybody said, like more and more interactivity, but instead maybe kind of relax a little bit and focus on creating environments that people can also relax in. And then maybe they will want to come back to these spaces over and over because it won't be yet another thing that is so demanding of their attention.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I would point you to Amber Case did an amazing talk at Futurespaces. She talks a lot about like comm technology, and Emily Baltz also has done some really interesting work on this. You know, just thinking about how these spaces can be a little bit more human, a little bit more comfortable. You know, like they don't like sort of overwhelm you. You know, and also like how they can be welcoming to people who have different sort of like neurodivergence and you know, just like different relationships to stimulus. All right, we are running out of time. So Christopher and Eric, I see you guys are both. All right, why don't we? We're gonna run a little long. I'm gonna let you guys both talk, and then also I'm gonna say like this is our first try at this new format. So let us know. You know, like email me josh@bluecadet.com or josh@futurespace.com if there's ways that we can like adapt this to make it even more useful for you. But Christopher, why don't you ask your question, then we'll go to Arik, and then we'll close up for the day. Christopher, you're on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Okay, good. I had I'm trying to bring a few.
I can hear you.
Hang on. I'm getting some other voices back in the background.
Oh, I can hear you fine.
Okay, it was the transcript from. Okay, sorry. It was the
Okay.
transcript from that was in the chat. Right. There were some things I just wanted to kind of connect the dots between the different discussions that were going on. One is that you know I'm coming from an architectural engineering background with lighting design and this kind of thing, but that I've transformed, I don't know, 4 times since then. So yeah, grew up cut my teeth in the University of Kansas many years ago. Now I live in Milan. I'm doing completely different work. Still very much involved in the embodiment and what is immersive experience. That's the kind of the through line of everything I've done. I started with doing children's hospitals that was actually immersing in a story. So it was children that were terminally ill. They had a garden that was outside their rooms. They could go in and explore this garden. And I saw for the very first time an interaction design, what it can do, what lighting design can do to bring the story to life. And so that for me was the kind of the sort of the spark that lit kind of the immersive experience and let me continue on that direction. What I learned with doing a lot of research inside Philips, we were looking at atmosphere providers in 2002 and then onward into LEDs, defining what those would look like in 2003. There was a lot of talk. I was shaping those solutions together with the designers inside the ecosystem of Milan in Italy. And then I kind of got sucked into Eindhoven eventually. But one of those designers, Maurizio Favetta, very great designer, very well known here, has done a lot of work all over the world. We got into a discussion about what immersive experience is about, and
the ironic thing about life is that you are a different person to everyone you meet.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Sorry, there's a background noise there. Sorry, there were 2 different pillars that we really kind of nailed down. And one was the exceptional experience, which we've talked about, the ice cream, type pop-up, where you're like, yeah, check, I've done that. And you don't need to go back, right? It's a social media experience. You call it what you want. It's a selfie moment. And then there's the immersive experience, which is something you want to go back to. And it doesn't have to be constructed. It can be going to the beach, for example. It's a place you want to return to. You feel completely in symphony with the environment, right? And then, so there's 2 distinct. One is, okay, yes, I've done that. I don't need to do it again. That's the Van Gogh immersive is that way, right? You've seen it, you've done it, check, done, right? Going into the mountains, going into the beach, going into a place where you feel, there was a guy even back in university that used to go underwater scuba diving just to get his peace of mind, kind of a meditative state, right? Comes to mind, right? So it's a place you want to go back to. That's immersive, right? and I could go on for a long time. I've got a kind of a long list here, but I think also back to what Karen was saying about the immersive technology. I think the discussion has so far, besides Karen, has completely missed what's going on. And even yesterday, what is going on between Johnny Ive and Sam Altman. We're talking about a layer of intelligence over everything, right? So the whole world is becoming intelligent, right? Becoming an immersive experience. So that's where the embodiment, the remembering, you get into Daniel Kahneman, you get into the episodal memory and experiencing memory. And then now what's the next one? When you can actually see stuff that never even went through your consciousness. What is this, like ghost data? It's not the exhaust data that you're producing. It's now ghost data. You can go back to the moments that you lived and then pull up insights and then relive those in the present that you were never conscious of in your past experience. This is what we're talking about. Like this is like frontier type research in experience. That's what I'm interested in. That's why I'm thinking like living intelligence. Where are we going with this? I also appreciate just going back to, again, what Karen Palmer brought in. The immersive experience framework of Kent Bai is really good. I find it presence is the key to everything. If you're not present, if you're not there immersed in the water thinking, how do I, where am I? The presence is the key to remembering. And so if you're not attentive in the moment, if you don't have attention in the moment, you're not going to be able to actually remember those episodes that you live. So Kent Bai has a model of active presence where you're actually doing something, solving a game, gamifying, you're playing. He has mental presence, where that was one of the first comments earlier on, where you're actually trying to solve something. Where am I? What am I doing? Right? That's the mental presence, and you're actually cognitively trying to solve it. There's emotional presence. What am I feeling? And that's what you get with good art. It makes you feel something. It gives you an emotion. And then there's social and environmental presence, which is this co-presence, which we're going to see with collaboration. We're going to see with all kinds of tools that are coming, right? So I like his framework because I can do a lot with it. He's coming back from like Whitehead in philosophy and that department. So there's a ton of other things that are going on. You guys really
this is a large elephant in deep rabbit hole.
You've got to come over to Venice Immersive. I went 2 years ago. I'm going every year from now on, right? Because
I love it.
There's things you've got in LA and San Diego. We have actors here in the VR chat immersive experiences in Venice that are actually interacting with us while we're trying to solve riddles and move through VR experiences. This is the new kind of frontier of experience. So
I love
anyway,
it.
I'll stop there. I could go on.
That was
for
great,
another 5
Christopher.
minutes,
That's
but,
great. I think it's a great way to end today. We always do a Black Mirror listening party or watching party. I'm actually trying. Anybody knows Charlie Booker? That's like he's my number one target for Futurespaces. But thank you everyone for being here today. This was
great format.
Super
Great
interesting. I loved having some space for this conversation. Please let me know how we can, continue to, evolve the conversation, keep it going. We'll try to document some of the many ideas and references and thoughts that came out here and share that with the group. But truly appreciate y'all for coming out. Next week we'll be live with Brian Collins talking about branding experience, but we'll carve out some space for some more of this conversation. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody.